Did you hear the coronavirus has a 3% mortality rate?
I heard it's 30 times deadlier than the flu.
Actually, 15 million people are going to die.
Oh, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. Welcome to the best show in the universe. I'm Maddox. Unless you've been living sequestered in a Canadian reality show for the last few months without any access to news or the outside world, and yes, this actually happened.
The virus has continued to spread worldwide.
Then you've probably been affected by the global pandemic known as the coronavirus. Symptoms include fever, coughs, and shortness of breath, and in an effort to obtain ass wipes, becoming one. There's a lot of panic, fear, and uncertainty about the virus, which is causing people to spread misinformation. Everything from the suggestion that you can avoid it by not eating spicy food, to the claim that it can be killed by doing cocaine and drinking bleach. Frankly, if I had to avoid eating spicy food, I'd rather get coronavirus. I'd sprinkle it on every meal like table salt before I give up heat. In one Florida county, the commissioner even suggested that using a blow dryer could kill the virus.
Once the temperature reaches 136 degrees Fahrenheit, and I said, well, how would you get the temperature up to 132 degrees? The answer was you use a blow dryer because it's capable of doing that. So you hold a blow dryer in front of your face and you inhale with your nose, and it kills all the viruses in your nose.
And he even managed to out-goofy himself by suggesting that you can use a deer hunting device that creates a nano-ozone layer, like a force field around your body that kills all viruses.
What they've developed, and I wasn't even aware of it, was a small device. It's nano-ozone that you wear on your clothing, and it actually sends out an ozone vapor that goes approximately 3 meters completely around your body. So any type of virus, corona, whatever virus you want to choose, regular cold virus, can be killed immediately by this ozone.
But of all the confusing and misunderstanding things about the coronavirus, one of the most misunderstood is the mortality rate. People are citing all sorts of incorrect numbers, even in the highest levels of government, because apparently the entire world needs a superhero like me to explain it to you. Now, before I continue, I need to make it clear that the reason I'm making this video isn't to downplay the severity of the outbreak, because Lord knows I've already done that. Oops. I've changed my mind, by the way. I don't want it anymore. I'm good. But the reason I emphasize the mortality rate is because people are starting to spread conspiracy theories when the expected mortality rate doesn't align with real-world conditions. We get dipshits who are driving by filming hospitals looking for bodies, because apparently hospitals just stack them up in parking lots. For example, this guy went down to film this hospital in New York.
This is the emergency room.
No, it's not. That's a parking lot. He goes on to show cars driving down the street as some sort of proof that there isn't a shutdown.
This is First Avenue. Does it look like it has some sort of shutdown that we have to all be afraid of? Are people getting tickets?
Yes, actually, it does look like there's some sort of shutdown. I found a time-lapsed video on the hospital's YouTube channel of what traffic normally looks like at night. This is the building he's standing in front of for reference. And then there's this guy who has incontrovertible proof that the mainstream media is caught red-handed using a mannequin during a news report.
All right, now I'm going to show you the slam dunk. I'm going to prove to you 110% that they are staging things here. Here you go. That's a doll. You can see the arm joint here. You can see the hair. It's a doll. In fact, I took a photo here of it, just to show you a bit of clearer sort of picture of it.
Wow, that's some great detective work. Sure enough, that looks like a doll. That's because it is. What we've just witnessed is the exact moment someone discovered a concept called B-roll. Yes, B-roll. It's stock footage that's sometimes used in broadcasting so they have something to show while the reporter is talking. The reason you're seeing a mannequin is because this is a training video. How do I know that? Well, there's literally a sign on the wall that says no food or drinks allowed near mannequins or task trainers. Oops. The mannequin footage is being used because they can't show actual patients in the hospital because of something called the HIPAA Act, which protects patients' identities and health information from being disclosed without their consent. In fact, the same video he got this footage from shows a clip of a hospital corridor with actual patients in them, and sure enough, their faces were blurred. But where this stops being goofy and starts being dangerous is when these idiots start bum rushing emergency rooms and attacking clinics. For example, a train engineer recently tried to crash a train into a Navy hospital to show people what's really going on.
Moreno stated that he thought the USNS Mercy was suspicious.
So it's important not to exaggerate or underestimate the mortality rate. At the time of this video, the general consensus seems to be anywhere from 1 to 4%, or about 20 to 40 times higher than the flu, which is alarming not only because it's relatively high, but because some very respected and high-level people in government and the media are spreading this misinformation, including members of Congress and media outlets. So where is the number coming from? One of the main sources I keep seeing shared over and over again is this map by Johns Hopkins University. Here's what it looked like on March 17th. Right off the bat, this entire map is very misleading. If you look closely at the list of areas with confirmed cases, they list cruise ship as one of the regions. And unless the people hail from the proud and sovereign nation of cruise ship, they actually belong to other countries, and it's likely that those numbers were double reported, since each country would have to have the due diligence to not only track this data, but then to deduct these numbers from their totals. This cruise ship will become a very important key to learning the true mortality rate that I'll get to later in this video. But first, where does this 4% come from? Well, this is what the map looked like on March 17th. The average person sees the number of confirmed cases, and then the number of total deaths, and goes, let's see, if I remember my grade school division, I'll just take the number of confirmed cases and set that as the denominator, and then I'll take the number of deaths and I'll set that as the numerator, and I'll divide the two and get a percentage. There we go. Aha, 4%. Wow, that's a lot of people. 4% of America means 13 million deaths. Holy cow. And that's not just conjecture. These are actual status updates that showed up in my Facebook feed as I was making this video. This guy says, math I learned in grade school gives me 5%, which seems much higher than the 1 to 3% everyone seems to be talking about. That's great, except for one small fact. They're wrong. There are 3 numbers that we need to look at, and only 2 of them are being used to calculate the mortality. The first number is the number of confirmed cases, and the second is the total number of deaths. Dividing these 2 numbers gives you about 4%. But there's a third, very big and very important number that's not being reported, and that's the total number of cases. According to the journal Nature, we know that up to 50 to 60% of people infected show mild or no symptoms. So we know that this number is significantly bigger than this one because people with mild or no symptoms aren't going to the hospital to get tested, so they aren't being represented in the total number of cases. That means we have to add the total confirmed cases plus the estimated number of mild or asymptomatic cases to get the true number of infections. We know this number is at least 50% bigger. But we're not done yet, because there's another important factor that needs to be considered when calculating the mortality rate. The numbers from the March 17th report are important because they represent an early number of confirmed cases, meaning that these people went to the hospital. But if people are going to the hospital, they're probably doing so because they have more severe cases. And since the majority of early tests were only available at hospitals, the majority of people who were getting tested were already in critical condition, meaning that they were more likely to die in the first place, which means that critical cases were being overrepresented in this data set. That would be like surveying people at Disneyland to ask them if they like going to theme parks, and then using that data to represent the average person. They don't represent the general population because people surveyed at theme parks are usually there because they want to be there. So that'll give you a result weighted in their favor. If the sample size included more of the mild or asymptomatic cases, the mortality rate would drop closer to what it actually is. How do I know that? Because the third most important factor needs to be considered, which is there aren't enough tests to go around. According to Statista on March 17th, the number of tests per million residents by country were as follows. Note that the United States had only 125 tests per million residents. In fact, 10 days later, the city of Los Angeles, one of the largest cities in the US, sent out a notice stating that the tests are strictly limited to only those who are 65 or older or showing symptoms, or anyone with chronic health conditions. And guess what groups of people are at higher risk for severe illnesses according to the CDC? That's right, people who are 65 or older or those with underlying health conditions. In fact, over 80% of deaths seem to occur in people aged 65 or older. So a higher percentage of confirmed cases represent people who are the most vulnerable to COVID-19 fatalities. But even that number doesn't tell you the full story. For example, on March 18th, Seattle reported 66 deaths, but 54% of them occurred because of an outbreak at a nursing home. And to complicate matters even further, according to some reports, early CDC tests couldn't even distinguish between coronavirus and water. But perhaps the biggest difficulty in getting reliable data is the fact that there is no standardized procedure for reporting this data internationally. Different countries, cultural practices, and reporting standards may make this difficult, if not impossible, to report consistently. For example, on March 18th, Russia reported only 147 confirmed cases. Okay, Russia, I'm sure that's accurate. In order to report the total number of confirmed cases, we're relying on the honesty, integrity, and accuracy of the countries reporting. Some countries report tests performed, while others report the number of individuals tested. In a pandemic where supplies are short, staff overworked, and panic is gripping the globe, hospitals aren't putting resources towards having a bean counter on staff for the sole purpose of ticking off a box on a form. These are busy nurses and doctors who are working to the brink of exhaustion, so paperwork isn't going to be their #1 priority. So it sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty in the reporting and a lot of numbers that we don't know yet. So what's an accurate estimate of the total number of infected people and a true mortality rate? I think the best estimate we have is roughly about 0.5%. Now, this is the point in the video where you say, Maddox, what makes you so smart? Maddox, why should we listen to you? You're not in 30. First of all, I have a master's degree in everything, so pay attention, cow. Remember that cruise ship data that was included in the Johns Hopkins map? That gives us a very important clue as to what's going on, because it's one of the only controlled environments we had to study this virus early on. On February 20th, according to the CDC, there were 3,711 people aboard the Diamond Princess cruise ship. 19% tested positive for the coronavirus. Of those, 47% were asymptomatic. That's consistent with this figure from earlier. And of the people who were tested positive, 9 died. That's about 1.3% of the infected passengers. So now you might be thinking that the mortality rate is 1.3%. That is, if you're an idiot. The average age of the passengers on board the ship were 62 years old. And since people who are 65 or older are roughly 2.5 times more likely to die from coronavirus, the adjusted mortality rate is about 0.5 to 0.6%. But some of you are still firing up your keyboards to go to the comments section and complain about my lack of authority or some flavor of ad hominem attack. So you don't have to take my word for it. According to Science News, they used the cruise ship data to come to the same conclusion by considering asymptomatic cases and extrapolating it to 0.5%. And this article points to a study by the Lancet Journal of Infectious Diseases and found that the mortality rate when adjusted for mild or asymptomatic cases comes to about 0.66%. And here's another article in Reuters about how people who calculate the mortality rate by dividing the number of reported deaths by the number of reported cases will give you the wrong answer. So what's the point of all this? Well, it's not that we should try to use the infection rate to determine the mortality rate, but rather to use the mortality rate to determine the infection rate. Now, if this mortality rate is correct, we can infer that the true number of infections is much, much higher than we're currently estimating. At the time of this video, it's being reported that there were about 1.5 million confirmed cases and 85,000 deaths. Using the mortality rate calculated by the cruise ship, extrapolating the actual infection rate gives us a whopping 17 million people who have coronavirus. That cruise ship data is crucial because when we have a virus that infects significant amounts of people who show no symptoms, it's one of the only controlled environments we have where an entire population of people have been tested. Then there is the anomaly of Italy. It has one of the highest mortality rates due to coronavirus. People are struggling to figure out why. If only there was some clue as to why Italians have a much higher mortality rate. If only there was some reason. All joking aside, Italy has seen one of the highest mortality rates during the pandemic. But according to Bloomberg, a closer look at the data shows that 99% of the people dying had other illnesses, and 50% had 3 or more, and over 75% had high blood pressure. Now that doesn't mean we don't need to take the virus seriously, as clearly the most vulnerable people in society are at risk. Some data indicates that Italy had one of the oldest populations in Europe. Getting this number right is important so that people will take this seriously, which is why I didn't at first, because we had so much fear-mongering about everything from bird flu to the Zika virus. It's also important to get this number right so that we don't have idiots bum-rushing hospitals looking for bodies in their parking lots. We need accurate data so we don't overestimate or underestimate our response. The measures we're taking to avoid exhausting medical resources are likely the correct ones. There's a video I'll link to by PBS that does a really good job of explaining why. And finally, there's the anomaly of more men dying than women, and my own personal conjecture is that Muslim women who wear a niqab might factor into a lower infection and transmission rate. Muslims make up 1.8 billion people in the world, and if roughly half of the population are wearing face masks, that could be a factor. Again, this isn't based on any studies, it's just me spitballing because I'm a genius. The other explanation is that men tend to take higher risks and are more likely to be smokers. Since this is a respiratory infection, smokers are people who are in poorer health and are more likely at risk. Anyway, just something to think about. If you think you need further information, I recommend just watching this video again and writing down everything I said. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Maddox.
You're not an authority.